Hey guys, this is Mika here back in another video. This one's going to be a tier list for OPR. This one is specifically targeted towards solo queue because in my opinion if you do any OPR queue with a group you should be winning, and if you're not winning with the group then you're probably playing to have fun or you need to reconsider what group you're playing with because it's honestly pretty easy to win with the group. So starting off with here, the best thing to do in OPR in general is to be a PvEer. If you want to actually win games and have as much impact as possible, PvE builds are the way to go. At the end of the day, one PvEer can literally stop a 20-man push and just completely turn the fate of an entire game. So if you're going to carry an OPR, PvEing is definitely the best way to do it, but there are other builds that you can do to have fun as well. I'd say PvEing, though, is the biggest impact that a single player can have in OPR, especially while they're solo queue. The next biggest impact in terms of builds, I'd say, are Light Healer, Light Bow, and Light Firestaff for this patch. Musket used to be up here, but with the nerfs, it doesn't seem to be very good, and from the range that you have to play to actually hit shots, Bow basically out DPSs you, so that's not nearly as high on this list as it used to be. But Light Healer in particular is just really good because it allows the rest of your army to do things that they wouldn't normally be able to do, and if you're a good healer, you can very easily swing the OPR to be in your favor. Some of the people that had the most wins in terms of OPRs were healers. They're either healers with hybrid builds or they were just full healer specs. Light Bow is very, very good just because Bow gets around LA version, and a lot of people are running LA version of Firestaff, as well as Bow counters Firestaff and seems to be one of the only weapons that can counter Firestaff effectively and can easily burst healers as well. Bow also has really, really good escape tools. It just tends to be a very good class for OPR to play. Light Firestaff, if you haven't played OPR, it is literally like World War II in terms of how many pillars of fire that are going off. It's definitely the go-to class if you don't know what you want to play and you want to just have some fun in OPR. Light Firestaff seems like it will be really, really fun until either people move on from it or eventually maybe it gets nerfed so people are still playing it given time, but it's a really fun class. It feels a little bit broken with all the burns. The burns could actually like out damage you in a sacred ground, which is kind of crazy and very different, but very fun class to play. If you haven't played it, would recommend playing it if you have not. In A tier, I put Blunderbuss in general. There's a lot of different Blunderbuss variants that you could play. It is definitely worse than it used to be before, but it seems like it got an overall a big DPS buff and can still very easily one-shot people. It seems like the build that can, in general, that can get the most kills in an OPR, but it's also the build that can get killed very easily in OPR, which is why I rate it high, but from a solo queue perspective, is a little bit harder to get value than with a group. With a group, Blunderbuss is absolutely insane and can be very, very scary because it can kill things in light or medium now with the changes to ammo, since that will basically make it so that you have a 20% damage increase on certain abilities, I believe is what it didn't affect before, so now your abilities do 20% more damage. They also nerf some of the abilities, so there are some trade-offs, but stuff like mortars hitting a lot harder, and overall it seems very, very strong. Light SNS also seems very, very strong, seems to be very popular, seems to be sort of the replacement to Greatsword. It can basically cross-map you, stun chain you, CC lock you down, and you don't have a way to escape most of the time, but it's very committal. By that I mean if the leaping strikes in, they don't have a way out, and they often can die to Bow and Firestaff if people are paying attention. That being said, it is a really good build to just pick off people when you're 1v1s and kind of take over from that perspective. It's also a really, really good build for back capping because it can get around the map really easily. Voidgauntlet in general seems to be very, very strong. I would say it's stronger to play Voidgauntlet with Voidblade than without, because of the CDR stuff being removed. Voidgauntlet feels a little bit more awkward than it did before. That being said, it is the only class that has access to Old Rend and still seems strong because of that Old Rend kind of carrying the class as a whole. Without the Old Rend, this build would probably fall down a little bit lower, but with the Old Rend, it still seems like it's a very solid class to solo carry, and especially if you're running Voidblade, you're able to keep yourself up, you're able to dish out the debuffs that you want to, and survive. Light Greataxe I think is also a build that's like pretty good at carrying, but the problem is it's very heal dependent, which is why I have it in B tier. If you're able to get a random healer in your group, this build gets a lot better a lot quicker, but Light Greataxe is just a build that can clump people up, nuke those clumps, and the advantage of playing Greataxe and Light over other weapons is the Maelstrom will eat the projectiles coming onto you so that you could actually live when you go for your Grav combo. Unlike a lot of other light melee classes, which can't be as greedy anymore because they'll just die, light Greataxe is able to be a little bit greedier and benefits from that. Heavy SNS also is a class that can kind of carry a little bit harder, but is more heal dependent, which is why I rate it in B tier. I think it is a class that is very, very powerful in this given patch. Just OPR solo queue perspective is not as strong as playing with a healer. If you have a healer with this class, you can kind of do criminal things. You can lock down chokes altogether. I've seen games where SNSs have single-handedly carried B point on the PTR and on live and held that for like 800 tick, which is just incredible. But it's just that prowess and the ability to shut down getting through a choke that makes SNS very strong in OPR. Light Spirits also is like fairly strong, but not as strong as Light SNS. It fills a similar role and it can cross-map dive people, but it also is fairly squishy and can get bursted. It is OPR though, so those light kill squad builds tend to be a little bit better than the medium ones, especially in a solo queue environment, since you might be able to get away and be able to heal yourself up versus having to depend on a healer. If you do have a healer, those light melee builds, and if that healer is good and pockets you, they could easily rise up to be S+, A tier. I wouldn't say anything above S+, it would probably be low S+, high A with a pocket healer, but they're much better with a healer in general. It's just, I don't think this would be a fair list if I rated stuff in terms of going into OPR with a 5-man pre-made group, because realistically, if you're going to a 5-man pre-made group and you're losing an OPR, there's other problems that you need to work on. It's still good for building synergy. I'm just saying you should be able to carry an OPR with a 5-man pre-made. In C tier, I have Medium Spear. Medium Spear is very, very dependent on having a healer, which is why it's like very hard to play in OPR, but you can get value out of it. There are some like interesting Medium Spear builds that have come about, and it seems to be very popular from a war perspective, but in the OPR solo queue, it's like a little bit harder to get value out of. I think other Greataxe builds are also in C tier at the moment. If you're playing a medium bruiser solo queue, you will just not be having a fun time. If you're playing heavy bruiser solo queue, you'll not be having a fun time. But with the healer, those builds are still really, really good. It's just without the healers, they fall off significantly, and honestly can make people want to quit the game like very, very quickly because it's just not fun to play that solo queue versus Firestaffs and Bows right now. And lastly, I have Light Musket down here. Musket in general is not very strong in its current patch. It seems like the changes have basically made it so that it can't counter the builds it should be able to counter. It should be a good counter to Bow. It should be a good counter to Firestaff because it has the range advantage. It seems like Bow kind of wins the duel versus the Musket now, and Firestaff can kind of cross map it with fireballs, so Musket's in like a spot where it can't really post up and shoot because unless you drop the accuracy, and if you drop accuracy then it doesn't have as much damage. Overall, I'd say it's like a healthier state of the game because it was just not really fun to play around it before, but that is kind of where Light Musket stands. And I'm going to get into specifics for each kind of build tier and go through some example builds in terms of what you could be running. In terms of PvEers, Light SNS Bow I think is generally the best because you can give the SNS passive to other people. You don't really lose a ton of damage by even going into a dex with the bow, and that will give you enough haste to get around the map very quickly as well. So you have like a combination of giving people in your group the damage bonus when you realize that they're in a fight, and then you can go back to your bow otherwise. I have seen some people that have the highest leaderboards like run SNS with Firestaff and just go play for the burn stacks. That doesn't seem that bad overall as well, but I think Bow tends to be a little bit better than Firestaff for PvEing because it lets you get around the map faster. Even with Suffer Kicks, you can really notice the difference. Light Bow Hatchet, I'd say, is right up there as well. It just helps you get around the map a lot faster with the Hatchet. You lose the leadership from SNS, this can help a little bit if you time that with your group going in, but it's still a solid build. Light Bow Rapier is also up there. It doesn't get around the map as well as Hatchet, which is why I rated it a little bit lower, but it's still generally a better PvP build, but it's a little bit worse in the PvP environment in terms of getting around the map because Berserk's speed boost tends to be a little bit more beneficial in my opinion. Light healers, Light Lifestaff Rapier seems to be the best by far overall. I'd say Lifestaff SNS is surprisingly good in OPR as well. You can kind of get out of dodge. Someone takes a 1v1 with you, you can stun them up, you can land a 20% weakened, and then you get your stand back when you land those shield rush. And then you could also just block some general projectiles that come your way. So it doesn't seem as bad as I would have thought it would be, and it's actually surprisingly annoying to deal with in a 1v1 environment. But in general, it doesn't hold up as well as Light Staff Rapier. I think light staff, Ice Gauntlet's not bad either, just to build the ult charge a little bit faster. In terms of light bow rapier is still better than light bow hatchet, especially with the hatchet nerfs, but those are the two main specs that you consider. I don't think light bow spear is bad as well, but I don't think it's a build that many people would take the time to main necessarily. It's a good hybrid build, and I think it's one of the better hybrid builds that you could run, but it's not super easy to play because you're inherently weak to two matchups. So you have to be really good at both individual matchups in order to get value out of that build. Light Firestaff, Ice Gauntlet definitely seems to be better than Blunderbuss in my opinion. Blunderbuss is like really fun, but the Ice Gauntlet just helps you live better, helps you do more damage in general, and Ice Spike goes right through LE Aversion, which so many people are stacking or warding to fire right now. It feels like really hard to deal with someone that's good with Firestaff and Ice Gauntlet, especially if they're good with spikes, versus Firestaff Blunderbuss. You can get away with a lot of people are doing OPR right now, and they're running like 35-40% fire ward, which is stupid and shows how broken those weapons are. But you can counter the entire spec by just warding against one thing, versus Firestaff Ice Gauntlet. You always have your back pocket Ice Gauntlet to get around stuff. Alright, hopping down into A tier now, Light BB. Light BB, I think if you main hand the BB, it's best with Ice Gauntlet. It's also really good with Greataxe. Ice Gauntlet and Greataxe, I'd run it in Light. Those are kind of clump nuker more oriented setups. Medium BB IG is also really good for helping peel your backline. These are builds that are like a little bit heal dependent, but not very heal dependent, so they tend to be very good in OPR, especially from a Soloqueue perspective. And then BB SNS and Light is also not that bad either. You can use, it's like an old combo, but doesn't feel as bad right now. BB VG is more heal dependent. I generally would stay away from it, but VG is inherently broken, so it's not a bad idea to run it with the old rend. And BB IG I don't think is terrible, but I would tend to stay away from it. It's like in the heavy variants for BB VG and BB IG. Both of them seem okay, but they aren't like super wowing. They don't do enough to really consider them to be builds that you like want to run most of the time. Light SNS I think is really good with Greataxe because you can kind of set yourself up for combos. You get low stand, the Greataxe gives you that stand back with its passive, and then you can get out of dodge with charge and leaping strike. So it's just a really good build for closing the distance, and it seems like the default replacement to Greataxe. Greatsword from last patch. Greatsword doesn't really seem viable in general, which is why I don't even list it as a main hand weapon on this list. Feels like it just dies way too quickly. But SNS seems to have risen up and taken its place overall. Light SNS Spear I also don't think is bad, and Light SNS Bow, as I talked about earlier, I don't think is bad as well for other options. In terms of Voidgauntlet, I think medium Voidblade tends to be the best because it just allows you to land those Voidblade hits the most consistently. It seems like kind of difficult to land Voidblade hits at the moment, but medium really helps you with that, and it also helps you dodge those like Firestaff shots coming at you and whatnot. Heavy doesn't feel that much more survivable, but I still think it's really good for Voidblade in particular. With both these classes, I tend to run Voidblade now because it feels a little bit awkward without the passive refreshing from sucking yourself or whatever, so it seems like a little bit better to have the Voidblade to get a little bit of CDR, have that aspect that you can go to if someone closes the distance down with you, and with the lifesteal you could often win 1v1s, 2v1s, or even 3v1s if you play your kit right. Light IGVG with Spike I don't think is bad either, but seems to be more inconsistent than some of these other builds, and you've really had the reach to get the Scream into Spike now, and it doesn't feel as consistent as it has in the past. Hopping down into B tier now, so these builds are like not awful, but they tend to be a lot better with the healer. Light Greataxe with SNS I think is really good. Talked about that earlier, but I was talking about main handing the SNS, and this one I'm talking about main handing the Greataxe. I think SNS is a little bit stronger overall to main hand weirdly with the Light, because the Greataxe has a little bit longer animations, but both are really solid. Greataxe Greatsword from last patch isn't awful, but the main problem is if you go into Onslaught on Greatsword, you cut your HP basically in a third. You lose a third of your HP, and it's just generally not worth it. So you have to go right tree, and at that point, it feels a little bit awkward to kill people with. Light Greataxe Warhammer I don't think is bad either, but again, it's a combo-oriented build that tends to not get a lot of value a lot of the time. And when it does get value, it's really fun. It's a really fun build to play in OPR, but I wouldn't say it's like a super consistent build to play in OPR. Heavy SNS, I think it's best with VG still. Greataxe is up there, both seem pretty solid. From a Soloqueue perspective, it can be really hard to stay alive, especially for all the Firestaff burns. But if you find sacreds, which you can actually kind of see now, if you don't get confused when you step in them and then they turn red for some reason. But when it does work, it's easy to see them, and it feels good from that perspective. Even if you don't have a healer, you could often survive with them, especially if you're running Divine and you're casting heals while you're on your SNS for the bonus. SNS Greatsword I don't think is bad either, weirdly. It's really good at genning your stam. I don't think SNS Spear is bad as well. It's really good for genning your stam, but Spear I feel like is a little bit more of a war build, and Greatsword is a little bit more oriented towards OPR. The main reason for that is Greatsword has a little bit better self-sustain from a Soloqueue perspective, and whenever you go for the spin on Spear and Cyclone and get your stam back, you often can get down really, really low with your HP, and it's a little bit scary. In terms of Light Spear, I think it's best with SNS, and next best is Rapier, and there's not much else you could really pair it with. Hatchet used to be a consideration. I don't think Hatchet's a consideration anymore. Seems okay, but it feels like SNS just kind of outclasses it, and SNS is better with other weapons than Spear at the moment. Medium Spear, I think it's going to be a really good war build. I don't think it's as good in OPR, especially from Soloqueue, because it's very heal dependent, but it is really good at holding space, and it's really good at harassing people, so you got to give it credit for that. I think it's best with SNS right now, but that's very heal dependent, and it's not bad with Greatsword. The main thing with Greatsword is you can't go into Onslaught again. You're mostly playing for a Defiant, but it's not bad. And from specifically an OPR build, I don't think Spear Voidgauntlet's that bad either. You have a lot of debuffs, and it can really pump out a lot, and you can kind of turn fights on your own with that build. But again, it's kind of heal dependent, so it's a little bit sketchy to run as a Soloqueue player. In terms of other Greataxe builds, medium Greataxe Warhammer and heavy Greataxe Warhammer just are very difficult to play in a Soloqueue environment right now when 15 people are running range, and anytime you try to run one of them down, you just get bursted. If you have unlimited gold, and you're willing to dump whatever you have on health pots, I don't think this is a bad idea to like run these, and it's like a good practice for wars, I guess. I would recommend playing other builds unless you have like a really, really strong mental. And if you do have a really strong mental, I'd probably consider playing 3v3 or doing 1v1s before going into OPR, because it just doesn't seem very fun for those classes right now. They are very good classes, and if you get a large number of them, they could very easily carry an OPR, but in small quantities, it just does not seem fun for those players, and I feel a little bit bad whenever I'm seeing them run around, and then they're just getting pelted by everyone because no one wants to get hit by them. And then lastly, Light Musket. I think weirdly Musket is best with bow, and it's not because that's necessarily good. It's like very easy to die with it, but bow is just better than musket, so if you have the bow as a secondary, you'll just inherently get more value than any other weapon that you could have it with. Musket Rapier is the next best option, best for escaping. It's kind of like built like a life staff, and then Musket Hatchet isn't bad specifically for OPR because it can help you live that one extra shot, which can be the difference versus some matchups. So that's it for this one, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. It's like a little bit of a different format in terms of like rating classes as a whole and then going into some specific builds, but I'm hoping this allows people to like kind of get what they want a little bit earlier, and then the people that want the more detailed content to have some more options in terms of classes that they could be playing. And I'll see you guys in the next video.